Hello, folks. It's Colin here, back with another segment of The Ongoing Race. Today, I'm interviewing Mr. Tommy Krysan. Mr. Tommy Krysan was born in New Orleans but raised in Chalmette, and he has worked in sports television and radio broadcasting in South Louisiana for over 25 years. He currently is the general manager of Pelicans Broadcasting based in Baton Rouge. He also hosts the very popular TV show Tigers Roar each Wednesday night at 8 o'clock p.m., which airs in Baton Rouge, Lafayette, and New Orleans on Pelicans Sports TV. He also hosts Pelican Sports Radio on WUBR 910 a.m., CBS Sports Radio in Baton Rouge, Monday through Friday from 3 to 5 p.m. He has also worked as a play-by-play announcer on the high school, collegiate, and professional level. When you talk about your experience within radio and sports broadcasting, have you seen an evolution or change? How have you seen that change so far?
Well, there's been a lot of changes in the world of broadcasting, mostly fueled by the internet and the many things that can be done, and the fact that we live in an immediate world, and sports fans can get access to basically any person they want, any event they want, any talk, and you can read blogs all over the internet. So certainly I think people are more in touch with the sports world now than they were some 25 years ago when I first began. I mean, back then you kind of had to wait for the newspaper to come out the next morning, and then you read a few stories. Now you pull up your smartphone, you grab your tablet or your laptop, and you can get anything and everything that you want in a matter of seconds, literally. So I think that has educated sports fans a lot more on the ins and outs and the do's and the don'ts and the nuts and bolts of sports and sports media.
Yes, and you mentioned the connection between the audience and the media and how the audience is able to receive information much more quickly. Speaking of the audience and media relationship, how do you think it currently stands when you talk about stereotypes, framing, and race, and perhaps how the audience views the media?
Well, I think the media, what the media truly is the medium between the sports team or the organization and the fans. And I think there's a lot of subjectivity in it. There's fans that have certain sportscasters that they like or sports writers that they like, and then they tend to follow them and get their information. And then, of course, you have people who have better reputations than others, and most people go to the credible sources. And I think that's good, but what I've always done in my 25 years of experience is I tend to read and listen to people I don't necessarily agree with, because I think it better helps you form opinions, and you got to hear both sides of a story, to use an old cliche, because then you can better determine what you might think. I've had my mind changed over the years. I may have thought some way about something. I read or listened to somebody who, I'll be honest, I wasn't a big fan of, but I wanted to hear their position on it. And there's been times when it's made me change my mind completely or made me think a little differently about it. So the media and the fans, there's a tremendous connection. And now media can, the fans can reach out to a sportscaster or a radio guy or a TV or print guy through Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all that. And you can have that conversation where years ago you didn't have that. I mean, you saw a sports writer or a sportscaster, and man, you felt standoffish a little bit, like, oh, that's a celebrity. Well, now I think everybody is a part of the sports world, whether you're a fan, a member of the media, or you're on one of the teams, or you work for one of the teams. So I think the connection is a lot more present than it used to be.
And when you mention that connection, do you think that the accessibility and that connection somewhat hurts the authenticity of this industry, being that everyone pretty much has the ability to chime in? And some people, for yourself, it's easy for you to differentiate between something that's genuine and authentic and unbiased because you say you read both sides of the story. But what about for people that necessarily can't decide? Is that an individual responsibility to be able to?
Yeah, I think if you want to know something about something, and this is in sports and this is in the rest of the world too, I think you need to educate yourself by reading and listening and gathering information, and gather as much as you possibly can if you really have a strong conviction about a certain topic or sports team or sports topic. Gather as much info as you can. There's so much stuff out there, Ward, that you really have to kind of weed through, and in time you learn, okay, I can really go to this person or to this website. I can listen to this radio station because for the most part I'm gonna get good information. For so many years, the thing in the media was to be the first one with the story. That story was broke by, or give credit. Now it's more important to be right and be accurate. What I've learned in my years is I'd rather be correct and accurate and be an hour late than jump out there with some information that misleads people or gives people the wrong information. So I think your quality people, your people that have been around for a long time, and this is nothing against young people in the business, but your quality people kind of know the difference. And, the mere fact that I'm coming here to, be with you today, I was on your side of the microphone here where I was a young guy, and I learned from people who were in the business about how to go about doing things and what was the best way and how I could better formulate my mantra or what I thought about certain things. So it's about gathering information. It's no different if you're going to buy a car. What you want to do, you want to get as much information about as many cars as you can, and then you make a good decision. Well, in the sports world, you want to get as much information as you can so you can make a decision as to what you believe in or what you think, and you have to be open-minded enough to know that you could be persuaded to think differently with the correct information.
Yes, and you mentioned the importance of just getting important and accurate information as opposed to just getting the story out first, specifically with you as a sports broadcaster and dealing with things such as stereotypes and framing. Framing is portraying an aspect of an issue as reality in order to promote certain aspects of society. Framing selects and emphasizes ideas and characteristics that are generally accepted in reality, while stereotypes are generally accepted as well. One of the specific stereotypes that I've looked into or researched that's generally accepted that has been over time is that for black athletes, they're typically glorified and given credit for their physical traits and attributes, while often white athletes are credited for success due to their intelligence. How do you think stereotypes such as those get debunked, or how do you get away from those stereotypes?
Well, I think if you try to stereotype and you try to categorize, you're being unfair to the person you're doing that to when you really don't know. That old saying, you never know what battles or issues a person's going through, until you get more information. This goes back to about information. We live in an information age, and I think, and I've learned this over time, you have to be sure to gather a lot of information before you stereotype. It's one thing to stereotype, and if you're going to do that, you have to be willing to come back off of it or to redefine things once you gather more information. But, there's more information out there, but I still think that people have to be careful when they're doing that without knowing enough of the facts.
And currently, those stereotypes are evident. You have athletes such as Deshaun Watson, who has come out and said, ladies and gentlemen, for those that don't know, Deshaun Watson was voted as the top collegiate quarterback last year, quarterback of Clemson University. He came out and said that dual threat and certain code words such as dual threat give off the perception that he's not as much of an accurate passer, although some may see dual threat as a compliment, meaning he can do both. He says that in the eyes of most people, that may belittle him as a quarterback passer. And you have Christian McCaffrey, the running back for Stanford University, who says, as a white running back, being that it's looked at as an athletic or let's say a black position, whereas quarterback is viewed as a white position. And you have Christian McCaffrey, the running back for Stanford University, who says, as a white running back, being that it's one of the looked at as an athletic or let's say a black position, whereas quarterback is viewed as a white position. He says that running backs are viewed, he says he's described as being tough and gritty, as opposed to, he says, a black guy would be more mentioned as being explosive and athletic, where he says that he's just as explosive and athletic, but he says that being white produces that stereotype that as a white running back, he's not as explosive. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think dual threat's a compliment. Anytime you tell a quarterback he's a dual threat, that's better than a single threat in the game of football. And, Deshaun Watson is certainly a very good football player on a very good team. This thing about white running backs, that truly doesn't matter. One of the goals of a college football player, especially at a major university, is to try to get to the next level, play professionally, play in the NFL. And I can assure you that, there's 32 NFL teams, and they don't see black or white. They don't see tailback or quarterback or dual threat or pocket passer. They don't see any of that. They're looking for somebody who, A, is a good person, and B, can help their football team win. That's the mantra at the NFL, the professional level. I think, we're getting into semantics here, but I think it's a compliment anytime you tell anybody they're better than everybody else at something. And, race doesn't matter to me. If somebody's good at what they do, it doesn't matter to me.
What do you say to someone like Bucky Brooks, who's a former pro football scout and an NFL network analyst? He says that being labeled a dual threat or a code word diminishes their standing as far as how they are viewed as a pro prospect. Guys like Deshaun Watson and some other quarterbacks have to fight against that stereotype to prove to others that they are worthy of being a franchise quarterback.
I mean, that's just one man's opinion, and I don't agree with it. I mean, again, that person, I would want to read more of what that person says or learn more about the man making the comments. But to me, that tells me he hasn't gathered a lot of information, and he doesn't have any insight into what the real story is, and that is, can you play football? Obviously he can play very well at the collegiate level at Clemson University. The question for the NFL is, can you play, can you help our team win? And if one team, you don't have to have all 32 teams like you. If your one team thinks you can be one of the guys that helps them win, they're going to cast their lot with you, regardless of what some commentators said. I mean, there's so many commentators out there, okay? If you put enough people in a room, you're going to find a bad apple in the bunch. It's just the way it goes. And again, I think this goes back to the fact that there's so much out there, and people have to weed through it and decide what's quality and what's not quality, and go by people who have a track record of doing and saying and printing and writing the correct thing.
Yes, and when you speak of instances like this between, let's say, athletes and the media, previously we spoke of the relationship between the audience and the media. When you talk about the relationship between the athletes and the media, you have current guys like Odell Beckham, who personally thinks that the media is out to get him, although that has nothing to do with perhaps race and stereotypes. But when you speak generally of the relationships between the media and athletes, how would you characterize that?
I think 98% of it's very good. I mean, I've dealt with professional athletes, college athletes, high school athletes, for 25 plus years, and I'd say 99% of the time, it's good in both directions. Again, are you going to ever have friction with somebody? Yeah. Is somebody going to not like what you said about them one day? Yeah, they're not going to like it. And I've had situations directly when, I won't say his name because he's kind of prominent in the media now, but a guy that was playing high school football in the Baton Rouge area, and I made the comment that I didn't think he'd ever make it at the next level because he appeared to take a lot of plays off when I was announcing the game, and if it didn't come his way, he was loafing and just looked like he didn't care, okay? Right. Now, I don't know if maybe he was a little bit injured that night, but that guy, I'll just tell you right now, that guy went on to play for over 10 years in the National Football League. So my comment was way off base, okay? And that person got mad about it. And now we've since talked, and it's all fine and good. It was just my opinion at the time, just happened to be wrong. Opinions can be incorrect. I've done it many, many times. I got a thing I always say on the radio. I've been wrong before. I'll probably be wrong again. It's what's going to happen if you talk for 2 hours a day, every day of the week, and you have the public forum, in my case of radio and television, primarily radio, that you're going to make mistakes. And you have to be willing to admit that, and you have to be willing, as I said earlier, have an open mind that if you need to change your thought, you need to do it. So I think you need to consider sources when you hear things, and I'm not a big fan of characterizing or stereotyping people, especially because most times, Ward, when it's done, the person doing it doesn't know a lot about the other person.
Right.
Example I just told you, the guy I was criticizing during a high school game, he may have had some injury, but he was so good the coaches wanted him on the field, and they may have told him, hey, if the ball goes the other way, this was in football, so if the ball goes the other way, why don't you just kind of take it easy and don't hurt yourself? We need you when the play comes your way. That happened, and my comments were totally off base. My comments weren't off base because I wasn't aware of that. And, at the high school level, you're not, meeting with coaches for an hour before the game, the day before the game, like they do collegiately and professionally now. So, again, I'm making my point that if you're going to categorize a stereotype, you better have a lot of information. It's probably impossible to have it all, but you better have a lot of information on both ends of the spectrum and then make your comment. And sometimes you can't do that. If LSU has a football game on a Saturday, we're going to make a comment in the post-game show. We don't have time to gather information. But I'm hoping people trust the fact that I've been doing it for 25-plus years and that my experience is going to be that I'm going to do the right thing more than the wrong thing.
And you mentioned that you utilize multiple platforms such as radio and TV. With television, you have a visual as far as the audience, and oftentimes when you see a visual with stereotypes or with certain framings, people tend to associate a certain image with certain stereotypes or frames, whereas radio, you don't have. Well, you can create imagery via words. How do you think that changes perhaps how the audience perceives the media, how athletes may perceive the media, or how does that change your job?
Well, quite simply, if you're watching TV, you have more information than you have if you're listening to the radio. If you're listening to the radio, all you can do is hear what's being said. If you're watching TV, you can hear what's being said and you can see what's going on. So you have more information from the television than you do from the radio, clearly. It's not even close. Plus, on the television, graphics can be put on the screen, other information can be put on the screen, the score, the time remaining, info, down and distance, all kind of things there where you're getting so much more information. So, certainly there's been times when I've had to do stuff on radio and TV in the same day, or sometimes a simulcast. Our post-game show after LSU is simulcast on radio and TV. Well, the primary thing is television, so we drive the content of the program to a television audience, and then the radio people just have to adjust. So certainly there's more information when you can also see something.
And are there any specific tactics that you may use or that you may give to other anchors or broadcasters to help ensure that the broadcast or your perception or what you've gotten is as accurate as possible? Perhaps not for you because you say you read both sides and you get as much information, but you may have some advice to other broadcasters who you may work with to ensure that they do their job as accurate and fairly as possible.
Well, I can tell you this, Ward. On a daily basis, I interact with many of my colleagues, whether they're competitors or not. They may be on another station, or we may, be head-to-head at the same time or whatever. But I interact with colleagues constantly in this world. I'll be like, hey, man, I heard X, Y, Z. What did you hear? Well, I heard X, Y, Z as well. Then you talk to a third guy. They heard the same thing. Well, there's more of a chance that that's going to be good information. Where if I say, well, I heard ABC. No, I didn't hear that. I heard totally opposite. Now you don't know what you got. So you got to keep digging. So I think sharing information, professionals, it's professional etiquette, professional courtesy. Doctors help other doctors out. Lawyers help other lawyers out. There's a degree of that in all professions, and certainly it's in the sportscasting profession where, I have tons of friends and colleagues. I call them friends because they are, that are writers. They're TV guys only, or writers only, or internet guys, radio guys. Or many of us do more than one thing. I've written on websites, and I've been on TV, I've been on radio, and here with you today, to kick around a few topics. So I think the more you can do, and the more good people and the more information you can surround yourself with, the better you're going to be in giving out your own information or giving your opinion on, major topics, whether they're local, regional, or national topics.
When there's a topic or a discussion where the topic is, let's say it ruffles some feathers when it's a topic that has to deal with perhaps race or stereotyping, or it's perhaps a touchy subject. Let's say for a guy like Cam Newton, who has previously come out and said that he believes that he's been stereotyped, or even let's say a subject now with the whole Colin Kaepernick situation. Whenever that subject is brought up, race is always brought into the equation. How does that perhaps change? How do you go about? How does your approach change?
Well, I try to stick with my morals and convictions on that kind of stuff, and I really don't approach it differently. Certainly, it can be a divisive topic. Certainly, it can ruffle some feathers, and I've seen arguments come out of things for political reasons or racial reasons. I've seen friendships be ruined the whole bit. And, everybody's entitled to their opinion. They can do what they want, be prepared to handle any consequences that may come with that. That goes for me, that goes for you, that goes for anybody listening. But I don't really prepare that any differently. I try to present both sides of a story, and I try to prompt people to think of how they want to view it. And I would hope they'd be open-minded enough. Maybe somewhere along the line I've changed somebody's opinion about something. As I said, my opinion has been changed a few times, many times over the years. And, I don't treat it any differently because in my world of sports broadcasting, if it's got to do with sports, sometimes those lines cross into political and racial and all of that. And if it's still got the root of sports, I don't have any problem talking about it.
You mentioned your experience over 25 plus years. How has the coverage of sports changed compared to your initial time within sports media?
Again, one word: internet. I mean, when I was first doing this, I literally used to buy, the Morning Advocate, the Times-Picayune in New Orleans, the USA Today, and I'd read through all the sports. And, that would take time and take more time than it does now. And I think with the internet and the smartphones that we all have, we're able to communicate and get information much more quickly, obviously, and then you can get more stuff in a short period of time. I can spend 20 minutes before I go on the air to do a radio show, visit my 4, 5, 6 websites, check Twitter, check Facebook, check my email because I'm on tons of email press release lists. And before I go on the air, I've got the very latest information about anything and everything that I want to find out about. And I'm a big baseball fan. I know who's pitching tomorrow in the baseball playoffs. You got all that information. Where when I first began in this, you didn't necessarily have that, and you had to, wait to get a hold of somebody, or you had to, call somebody and then hope they called you back. It was just a different world. I think it's better now, and it's better for sports fans, which, sports fans are why we have sports.
Just last week, I believe, you had Andrew Jones come out and say that he doesn't believe that black players have come out with their form of protest or spoken out because baseball is, quote, a white man's sport. Why do you think that baseball isn't as diverse as other sports? Do you think it has to do with the socio-economic aspect as far as finances or the support? Do you think it has to do with certain regions, or what do you think?
Well, first off, I think baseball is very diverse when you throw in the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico, and you throw in the guys from China, from overseas, and from Canada, and all of that. There's a lot of diversity there because diversity is not about white and black. Diversity is about everybody and everything. Andrew Jones played in the big leagues for a long time. He was in clubhouses. He was in stadiums. He knows. He was in a minor league system. He's familiar with all of that. I don't think baseball is a white man's sport. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I would say less than 50% of baseball is white people or Caucasians. So I don't know that Andrew Jones is information. I'd like to know how he came to that conclusion. But you got youth sports programs across this country, and many of them are pricey or expensive to be involved in, but there's also programs that aren't. I don't know why you don't have more black kids in youth baseball. I'm very active in youth baseball and have been for a long time, and there's not as many. I don't know the reason for it. I'm not smart enough to know it, but certainly, when you look at it, diversity is more than black and white.
When you look at it as far as African Americans outside of the international players and perhaps, let's say, inner city kids, I think that's where the lack of kids within baseball, that number struggles. But when you look at a sport like, let's say, basketball or football, I guess it's not as structured. But with football, you can just get a football and have people, and you just need space. And with basketball, it just requires a court and people. Whereas baseball, there's equipment, people, you need a field. And a lot of times these resources aren't as available for inner city or less fortunate kids, specifically when you talk about camps and things of that nature. So,
well, basketball you can play by yourself. If you got a ball and you got a rim somewhere, you can play basketball. If you don't have a rim, you can practice dribbling and stuff. Football, you need a bunch of people. Baseball, you do a few things by yourself, but to play baseball, you need more people. Basketball, you need one. And two, makes it double the fun. I think what you're saying, that there's some truth to that when you look into inner cities as to what may be available, especially the bigger cities. And, they've got lots of social problems in those cities. And unfortunately, it trickles down into the sports world with the young kids. I mean, we need to be doing a better job of educating young kids and giving them an opportunity to get involved in sports. But in the big picture, it doesn't happen like it should. And the reason for that, I'm not so sure. It's probably political, but I'm not smart enough to know the answer to that, but I wish it was better.
When we talk about percentage of African Americans in Major League Baseball, according to the Sports Business News and the Major League Baseball Racial and Gender Report Card, on the 2015 opening day rosters, 8.3% of all Major League players identified as African American, while back in 1986, the MLB had a percentage of 18.3% of African Americans. So a few decades ago, back in the 80s, 18% of African Americans, down 10% to 8.3% just a season or so ago. So what do you think contributes to that?
I think the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico and China and Japan and the influx of international players has probably had a big impact on that number. There's no question, and I don't know if we have the numbers on those categories, but that's the biggest difference. I mean, if you go through the major league rosters now, you can just go through the playoff rosters. I mean, if I had the time, maybe it could be done and break down the percentages. I think you'll find the international impact in Major League Baseball is probably the biggest factor in that decline in percentage.
So you say that just pretty much the rest of the world is catching up in baseball, or they're getting more exposure as more players are coming over and you're seeing more success. So do you think that's contributed largely to it?
Yeah, and I mean, you got professional baseball in Europe, you got professional baseball in Italy. We know about the Dominican Republic and in Puerto Rico and down in Panama. We know about, they play baseball year-round down there. The weather's conducive for that. Japan and China have really increased their baseball stuff. Australia, really big on baseball now. I mean, look, 20 years ago we didn't have the World Baseball Classic. It was unknown. It was not a thing at all. And now it's a pretty big thing. I don't think it's as big as they want it to be, but it's a pretty big thing, and it brings attention to the game of baseball because it's being played all over the place. And whereas tackle football, i.e. the NFL, you don't have that type of football being played a whole lot in other places. Yeah, there's some in Canada, there's some in Europe, but it's not as prevalent as baseball, and probably it's all exceeded by basketball. I mean, basketball is much more of a world sport than football or baseball.
At the end of the day, it boils down to just the global acceptance, the popularity of the sport. And
and everybody wants to play. I mean, I'm in the sports world on a daily basis and have been since I was 2, 3, 4 years old, whenever somebody first threw me a ball or whatever. And I think kids, for the most part, not every kid, because it's not for everyone, they want to play sports, or at least want to try it. and see if they like it. I had two children. My son played a lot of sports. My daughter played next to none. She just wasn't into it, and both very successful people. So I think sports is a great thing. It teaches character, teaches hard work, it teaches teamwork, and all that good stuff. There are a lot of qualities that come out of sports, and I wish it was there for more youngsters to engage in and at least give it a shot. Again, it's not for everybody. There's there's tons of very successful people that, there's very little sports in their life, if any, to any degree, whether that's watching, playing, participating, or anything. So, it's always been a part of my life, always will be for however long I keep plugging along here, because I think it teaches a lot of things about life.
You mentioned how everyone wants to play basketball and pretty much how it appeals to global audiences. Like athletes such as Yao Ming has helped the game of basketball grow. As I previously mentioned, black players did not appear in the NBA until the 1950s. Chuck Cooper became the first player in the NBA to be drafted, while Nat Clifton was the first black player to sign an NBA contract. As of the 2014-2015 season, 332 out of the total 446 NBA players were African American. That's 74.4%, while 104 out of the 446 were white, as in 23.3%. What do you think has contributed to that inverse or flip in the demographics of the game of basketball?
I just think they're given more opportunities as kids, or opportunities are more accessible as kids, and you got less players on a basketball team than baseball and football, and it's all about who can play. We've seen the international players in the NBA. You mentioned Yao Ming. So I just think it's maybe by a choice to try to excel in that sport as opposed to other sports. So I think that's what it is, just who has the talent, who has the skill to play that sport at that high level.
What do you say, there is research in 2012, the Lagos Blacha, in their research, they said that although black athletes have increased in quantity, the quality has not necessarily translated to a better or more fair quality of media coverage for them.
I don't agree with that. I mean, I think that, your professionals and your good people in the media, they don't see black or white or Dominican or Chinese, and they don't see any of that. I mean, you got some people who do, but then it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. You got to consider the source. I mean, if somebody's going to make comments or write them or say them based on that, it's probably not somebody you want to pay attention to.
And what do you think, as sports continue to evolve and also the media, how do you see that evolution continue as sports and the media continue to become more diverse? What changes or what practices do you see changing?
Well, I mean, again, the internet has changed everything, and the media is the medium between the team, the athlete, and the fans, and you're supposed to ask questions that you think the fans would want to know answers to. I would hope it continues as it is, where for the most part it's very open communication in both directions, where you can ask tough questions, you can get hard answers, and let the fans know more about the people that they want to go see play sports, and because then there's that connection. I mean, you got to have fans. Without fans, we got nothing. Okay, you got nobody in Tiger Stadium, they're not going to have many games for long. If you got nobody at the ballpark or in the arena, you're not going to have games for long. So the more the fans feel connected, and the media is the catalyst for that connection, so that when you pay your money to go watch the game, hey man, I know that guy likes red beans and rice, and I know he's a good cook, or I know he likes to go fishing when he's not playing. The more the more attachment. Fan is short for fanatic, because fans are fanatical, and they have a passion for sports. And again, without the fans, you got nothing.
What do you think perhaps are some ways or some things that can help that connection between the audience and the media, besides perhaps the internet?
Through the professionalism of the members of the media to do the proper job to communicate all of the information so that the fans can make a decision. And it's impossible to communicate it all. You're never going to know everything about anything. That's not feasible, it's not possible, it's not doable. So I think that you got to have professional people behind a microphone or in front of a camera, or I guess nobody writes with an ink pen no more. Everybody types everything on the tablet or the computer or whatever. But you got to consider the source. And if you got a good professional source or a good, credible person in the media, whichever platform that might be, and that's where I think the fans gravitate to that. I've seen people come and go in the media world, and the reason they go is because they're not professional, they're not accurate, they don't give out good information, and sooner or later nobody's listening. The media, like sports, if nobody listens to me or watches me, or in the case of a writer, nobody reads it, you got nothing. So, but the bad apples do get weeded out of the batch, and I've seen that happen in my 25 plus years, where people who don't do the right thing end up not doing it anymore. And I think fans are smart. Fans are very educated. They're very smart. It's easier now for them to see through somebody who may have an agenda or who may not be doing the right thing.
That's, I guess you would consider the responsibility of the media, the right to do justice. That's to be given to the audience. But there is a responsibility for audiences as well. You mentioned, and it has been proven, that sports audiences question media personalities' credibility based on their likability and trustworthiness. You mentioned that earlier as well, how an audience member is more likely to accept or listen to a guy that they like. So you previously mentioned the media's responsibility. What do you think, as an audience member, do you think that they have certain responsibilities as well in order to help that relationship or the connection that you previously spoke of?
Just be truthful and treat people with respect. And if you disagree with somebody, talk about it. You may change somebody's opinion. I've had many a person who's listened to me on the radio, and we may sit down for a hamburger or a cold beer or something, and we'll start talking about something, and one of us will change the other person's mind. It's what fuels the world of sports, the conversation about it. I mentioned if you don't have fans, you don't have anything. Well, if you don't have conversation about the Saints or the Pelicans or LSU or Southern or Tulane, you don't have anything. So I think it's all good. And I would say this, 95% of it is good stuff. But like anything, there's going to be some bad apples in the batch, and hopefully people can see past that or recognize that and then not go in that direction anymore.
I think the reoccurring theme is pretty much being genuine, being open, and also not being afraid to address certain issues that you may have or that people may see. I think that that's one key, and a purpose for a platform like this is to get that other side of the spectrum and actually talk about these issues, or it might not even be an issue, just perhaps more misunderstanding, or just to get people more informed.
Well, and I think you use a good word there, misunderstanding. I think if we dug to the root of a lot of differences, it may be due to misunderstanding. And one reason you may misunderstand something is because you don't have enough information. I kind of keep going back to that, but what if I tell you 10 things about me, okay?
Right.
You're going to read the 10 things and say, okay, Tommy, okay, I got a little feel for who Tommy is and what he is. What if I give you 100 things about me? You're going to be able to better make a statement that, that Tommy's a good guy or Tommy's a bad guy.
Right.
And if somebody says, well, why do you say that? Well, I got 100 reasons why. But if you say, well, I think he's a bad guy because he hung up on me on the phone the other day. Well, that's not enough. I might have had an emergency and had to hang up. Somebody may have walked in my office and said, hey, man, I got to talk to you right now. Start hollering and screaming. I had to hang up on you. So, again, you never know what's going on in other people's world. Gather information. And in this sports media world, for fans, for members of the media, for members of teams and organizations, take an extra second to gather more information. And a lot of times people, when you're having a conversation, they're too busy trying to think of what they're going to say next instead of listening to what's being said by the other person. And if you don't listen, more chance you misunderstand. Just like if I give you 100 things about me, you're going to have a better picture of me in your mind than if I give you 10.
Right.
Simply put, simple logic there. So anyway, we could go round and round on that for days and days, and there's people a lot smarter than me that could could get deep into that stuff. There's people that deal with this all day, every day. I just try to deal with football and baseball and sports and fun.
The main thing that I got from that is, correct me if I'm wrong, is when you have more information, you're able to get more specifics rather than making more of a general assumption or a general idea, whereas to knowing specific information, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I know you're from New Orleans. I'm not assuming you're from New Orleans. I'm not
Right.
thinking you're from New Orleans. You told me that earlier. You're from New Orleans. I told you I'm from Chalmette. So you know that. You're not guessing it. You're not supposing it. You're not thinking it. And so that's a microcosm of what I'm trying to say. If, you're going to talk about football or basketball or baseball or whatever the sport may be, let's talk. And I think my responsibility as a professional journalist is to be accurate, to be fair, to look at both sides of things, and then express my opinion. And many a times I'll say when I'm on a program, this is my opinion, my 2 cents worth, and this is not reflective of anybody else's thoughts. And then I spit it out, I fire it out there, and then people can decide, hey, I agree, I don't agree, or maybe go listen to somebody else, compare notes, get information. I keep bouncing back to that word, but I think my 25 years of experience in this business, it all goes back to that. And I was told that a long time ago, the more information you can get, the better you're going to be.
What do you think about the use of certain words? I mentioned earlier how people can associate certain words with certain stereotypes. For example, whenever you use words that kind of have animal characteristics, when they talk about that guy being an animal or a freak or he runs like a horse or things like that, some may feel that that's innocent commentary and it's just an innocent thing that comes to mind, while others think that those type of words promote stereotypes and framing, and a lot of times those words can ruffle feathers. What do you think about those?
Well, a lot of it's spontaneous comments, and I think it's innocent. People that get offended by that need to find something else to worry about. I mean, if you and I go outside and race, we run the 40 and you beat me by 20 yards, and I say, that dude's fast as a cheetah. Well, a cheetah's a fast animal, so I'm making an analogy. Okay, if I beat you, I'm going to say, man, that guy's slow as a turtle, because a turtle is known to be slow. I mean, I think people overcook that stuff and read way too much into it. Again, the people that are focusing on that, I don't know that they're true sports fans.
There's also been research that states whether it's certain words or the way that they're described, athletes are prone to believing certain stereotypes about themselves, whether it be black athletes or white athletes or any athletes for that matter. What do you think are some ways to perhaps get away from that?
I don't know what particularly you're talking about, but I mean, again, people.
Well, for example, when you talk about stereotypes, as far as describing players as athletic, powerful, or having certain jumping ability with black athletes and with white athletes, you're being described as smart players and good leaders. And going back to what I said earlier about black athletes with the physical attributes and white athletes with certain intangibles. For the general person, how do you stay away or get away from these?
Well, again, I mean, if somebody's using a word to describe something, maybe that better informs the person who's trying to understand. I mean, I've used many of an analogy in my day, in my broadcasting career, probably more than I could count, and it's all just in an effort to better inform somebody. And if somebody gets bent out of shape over it, again, I don't think you're a sports fan. I don't think you understand what the conversation is. If you're worried about what type of way someone uses to describe something. With that being said, I mean, we all know the difference in. I hope I know the difference in a spontaneous description of something or a malicious description of something, okay? And if it's malicious, I mean, that person needs to be removed from what they're doing, effective immediately. So I think if you could draw the line between those two, everything would be a lot better.
As far as diversity within media, how do you think it's helped? And how do you think that the lack of racial diversity in media has hurt?
I don't know, if there's I don't know the diversity statistics in the media. again, when I watch or listen to somebody or read somebody, I mean, I'm looking for the content and the credibility of the source. I think quality journalism, quality media is what you want, and I think most people, that's what they go for. The bad stuff is a very small percentage.
Can you describe for me the goal as a journalist, and also you mentioned great journalism or accurate journalism? What to you, do you have a definition as far as what's the objective and a great form of journalism?
Well, again, I gather information. I have a microphone that I can speak into Monday through Friday afternoons, and I try to do my best to put out accurate information, informative, try to entertain a little bit. People forget that, the E in ESPN stands for entertainment. So I think you have to entertain, inform, and hopefully provoke some thought. I've had people come up to me and go, I used to think this about that, and you really changed my mind. And, of course, that's happened to me. I've had people change my mind. So my goal as a sportscaster is to gather as much information as I can. Certainly I inject my own opinion and thoughts into things, and then hopefully, I got an audience out there that thinks, hey, the guy does a good job. I respect him. Might not always agree with him, but I'm going to listen to him, and then we'll crank it up again the next day.
What do you think about platforms such as this particular project? Just your impression.
Well, no, and I appreciate you having me here, and it's always great for me to talk about sports. It's what I do. I love to do it. Every now and then I like to forget about sports, play a little music or something on a personal note there, but I think it's good to discuss and what you're doing by speaking to me, who have some experience, and I know you're going to speak to other people as a part of your podcast project. I think you're to be commended for going out, and what you're doing is you're gathering information, and something I say may or may not change your mind. Something one of the other folks you talk to, things you say, I take in, I listen, and so I think what you're doing is good as a young journalist. Somebody who's trying to get into this world and get into this career. I can tell you it's fun. It can be fun. It can be hard work, but if you have a passion for sports, being in the media, being in the sportscasting world is a way to be truly connected to it, even though, I wanted to be a professional baseball player. I played through the collegiate level. That was it. Wasn't good enough to play in the pros. But being in the media has allowed me to stay very connected with all sports and with my passion for baseball. So, it's a great opportunity. I think what you're doing is great, and this is going to help you as you go forward in your career.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Tommy Krysan of Pelicans Sports TV, thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.